Everyone, it's Tuesday night. I wanted to give you a little recording, as I've mentioned before, I think, about the sort of theoretical angles, which I'd like you to consider when you are posting to forums 6 and 7. The aim, as you've seen, is really for you to share practices. The theme for this unit is what do we actually do with technology when we're in the classroom? But in order for this not to become too descriptive, again, and just become a long list of practices that we're observing, to give it some sort of articulation so we can find our way through all of what we're posting, I'm proposing that we actually look at a theoretical angle. So again, the question which has been popping up a lot in conversations already, not what do we do with technology, but what are we trying to achieve with it, right? What's our actual goals before we even select the technology? And I think if we try and take that theoretical angle, it's going to suddenly become a lot easier to actually classify the different goals, different pedagogical goals that we have in the classroom, and then the technology. That's my assertion at this stage. I think technology is going to fall in place and being seen very much as an affordance, simply a tool that you're trying to do something with. And often it's going to, again, be my assertion on this course is that often the debates or the argumentation, sometimes the heated debate, sometimes people disagreeing, they're not disagreeing about technology. They're disagreeing about what they actually want to do in the classroom. They actually are not seeing eye to eye in terms of theory and in terms of goals for pedagogy. So I think it's going to help you. I've identified 10 sort of theoretical stances. You could arguably put more or put less, but that's what I'm suggesting for you for these 2 weeks. And I'm suggesting that we simply do them, in two halves, and that we tackle 5 this week and 5 next week, so that we end up having the projects that we discussed, the initiatives that we discussed, the practices that we see in classroom being already categorized as you start describing them. And I think that's going to help us get back to this notion of overarching goals, which are more important in the end of the technology itself. So I wanted to give you a little explanation because I know that at master's level, sometimes you're familiar with some theory, not all of it, depending on what your background is and what you've, if sometimes you've been exposed to it in your BA, sometimes you haven't. So I want to give everyone, equal footing as they start. So just to give you just enough so that you can then explore by yourself, but to make sure that nothing is too sort of opaque for you to sort of throw yourself in. So we'll tackle the first 5 this week, and then I'll do a similar video to tackle the next 5 next week. I was originally going to do it all, but I figured 10 theories in one night in a short video is going to be too much. So let's just do it in 2. Some of it is going to be fairly easy. So let's go. We start for this week. Social capital theory, we've already discussed, so I don't think you're going to have any difficulties with that. There's a short video that's been posted already. We did have to introduce that one quickly because it is discussed so much when we come to look at why we're using technology. But again, just in a nutshell, social capital theory is something which is getting increasingly important and more and more knowledge in education. We have so far historically looked mostly at knowledge as a commodity, which is transferred to students in a classroom or in a school environment. Social capital theorists argue that actually the main goal of schools is not the transfer of knowledge, but it's the creation and enrichment of social capital. Social capital is discussed in different ways by different theories, but a good, easy way to approach it is to look at it in terms of networks. Social capital is the ability to do things, literally to capitalize on situations because of the scope, of the width of your networks and of their richness. And so most of the discussions that you're going to see around social capital theory come back to this analysis of networks. And the goal when you're trying to provide social capital theory, social capital to your kid within an educational environment is to, fly on my screen, is to try and widen their networks and to enrich the quality of these networks so that they become valuable connections and connections that they can actually extract benefits from. So you're going to see a lot of projects out there that use technology and specifically have social capital in mind. And now I will let you explore that by yourself, or maybe just reflect on practices that you've seen in schools, in your schools, in other schools. Constructivism is another one that we've talked about a lot, and we can take them together, constructivism and social constructivism. So the go-to author for constructivism is Piaget, a Swiss psychologist from early 20th century. For social constructivism, it's a Russian psychologist called Vygotsky. So these theories have been around for a very long time, over a century, and we talk about them in teaching. We often, especially in Canada, identify them as being the two foundational theories in 21st century pedagogy. But obviously, the argument is that we're not quite there yet. And we talk about it a lot, but we don't actually always achieve it in classroom. Constructivism argues, well, for both of them, constructivism argues that knowledge is not a commodity, but that it is actually something that is created by the learner themselves. Hence the construct, right? Constructivism, the notion of construct in the stem of the word. The difference between constructivism and social constructivism, once you get deeper into the theory, is that for Piaget, who advocates for constructivism, it's actually about the learner, and he has an elaborate theory in different stages and shows you all this, that it's the learner themselves individually who constructs knowledge through an experimentation of the world around them, and through a progressive development of what he calls schemas, so categories in the mind that enables us to deal with new experiences. But that's the important thing to remember, is that for Piaget and for most constructivists after him, it is an individual process. He argues that any child does this through their development. They don't actually need anyone. That's his argument. Social constructivism that Vygotsky, they've never actually met or argued, but their followers have argued and over the century. For Vygotsky, he really prones the importance of language. And so he really links development with language and argues that really it is impossible for a child to actually construct knowledge if he's not in interaction with others, specifically with language. And that therefore social constructivism, the construction of knowledge by learners, happens with others and never on your own. That it's actually through collaboration, teamwork, through deconstructing concepts together that the learners are actually constructing knowledge. Again, you're familiar with social constructivism because it's the foundation of Royal Road's pedagogy. So why do we have this team, this cohort model, this team assessment systematically on all the courses? Is because there's an ingrained and fundamental belief in social constructivism within the university. So I'll let you explore both of these. I think you're going to find an abundance of projects and initiatives that actually are using technology, but are using it specifically for these two goals. I'll give you a hint, but constructivism, you're going to see a lot of project-based learning, individual project-based learning, a lot of e-portfolios, that sort of things. For social constructivism, it's all going to be about collaboration, so using technology to collaborate. So sometimes, again, project-based learning, but collective project-based learning, or other initiatives and other projects. So I'll let you explore that and see what you come up with and what you can tell us about the use of technology within those goals. Experiential learning, this week is going to be fairly easy because we've looked at most of these. Experiential learning theory, you go back to Kolb, who's a writer who is not from education, actually comes from business, but who really coined the term and the theory, and then it grew from there. This notion that really learning has to happen firsthand. So not through a teacher, not through a book, not through a secondhand experience, but actually can only be genuine and can only be really rich learning if it's actually done in firsthand experiences. And if you look at the literature, you're going to find it easily on the net. You will see that Kolb suggests or proposes a 4 point cycle, a run cycle, where the learner first makes an experience, and then tries to conceptualize that, and then generalizes, and then returns to the experience. And he argues that that's what all learning is essentially, all genuine learning is essentially experiential. Lots of offshoots in terms of literature. that looks at both how we can bring, therefore, if learners need to learn firsthand, how can we bring the world into the classroom? And also, how can we take the classroom into the real world so that that first-hand experience can happen, that genuine, rich learning can happen? We've started discussing this. You're going to find a ton of things to discuss around experiential learning, I'm sure. And the last one for this week is collective intelligence theory. So again, this notion that here knowledge is conceptualized in a different way. It's conceptualized as something that we build, but we don't build it individually. Collective intelligence theorists argue that we build it collectively. So therefore, that knowledge is sort of cloud. And it's interesting because they used to the word cloud before it became technology sort of related, and we started talking about data clouds. But they argue that knowledge is a collective sort of endeavor, and it's something that we all contribute to and then we tap from, but it's not something which is individual. And hence, everything that has erupted around open OER, open education, open educational resources, this notion that really knowledge should never really be tried to be constructed in small group, in islands, in fishbowls, but on the contrary, that it can only really contribute to anything and it can only be real knowledge once it's shared in the open, because then we contribute this cloud sort of collective, of knowledge, and then we're not, limiting it to ourselves, to a group. So I hope you found this helpful. I'm having a terrible feeling that the screencastify interrupted at one point there because I stopped seeing the caption at the bottom. But I'm going to stop now and check it, and hopefully it has worked. So do share as many experiences as you can in terms of classroom practices, projects, but trying to relate them explicitly back to these theories, because I think it's going to be very helpful to us to then be able to understand some of the debates that are happening, not in terms of technology, but in terms of what we're trying to do with technology. And then next week, we'll look at the other 5 theories, which I'm proposing for you. So have a good night, and I will talk to you not tomorrow, it was Wednesday. Yes, tomorrow night. There's another set of presentations. So I will see you then. Have a good night. Bye.